A whole 14 months went by after Final Fantasy VII Remake was released until we got the Remake Integrated DLC, also known shortly as the Yuffie DLC. If you've been following the channel's recent challenges, you may have also seen how I've been completing the entire story of the Remake trilogy without the use of materia and items, and that is exactly what we're going to be doing here today. Yuffie's DLC is definitely a lot shorter than the main game of course, however that didn't make this challenge any easier. If you do want to check out the videos I previously mentioned, you can find the links to them down in the description. But that's enough rambling, let's get into this Materia Hunter's story and see how it goes. We start off with her practicing the little performance that she's going to be showing Avalanche, but once this is all over, I spend the time removing all materia that comes pre-equipped to Yuffie. I then upgraded her shuriken to give us some more HP for some extra survivability, as well as some more attack power to give her a little more oomph. Not too long after this, we decided to go crazy on these smaller enemies and really get a feel for the ninja's combat. I must say, being able to lift enemies into the air and carry out even longer combos is an amazing feeling after dealing with Remake combat. But yeah, we got through these fights with no problems. We then bump into a Drake, however once activating Wind Ninjutsu, it shot the stagger gauge letting us finish this enemy off too. Upon entering the local warehouse, a robed guy is just chilling nearby. However, with no response from Yuffie's waving in his face, we carry on moving onwards until we leave this building. I make sure to grab the pair of power wrist guards outside for the 5% increase in our strength, then see another robed man being ambushed by some rabid dogs. We create our own path across and then rush to the rescue before he gets eaten alive. I thought I remembered these enemies being relatively difficult when I first played the DLC many years ago, however I used my ninjutsu to keep my distance from the wolves and dodged out of the way of the binding attacks when they went for me. Once one had been avoided, it left them pressured, so after lifting them into the air with my magic attacks and using my ATB for the added damage, there was no chance of it leaving this fight alive. So with one down it left one to go, but since I dodged another one of its throat clamps, it left it pressured, so I finished it off with an out of war. Unfortunately, we didn't even get a thank you off the guy who was about to be prey for the wolves, but we left this area and ran all the way to the slums of Sector 7. Shinra was broadcasting on the news, giving everyone an update on the destruction Barrett and the others were doing, but right after this, the guy with a name I can't pronounce shows up to take us to Avalanche's hideout. Once we get inside, we head down to the basement and get an introduction to the squad. We use this chance to show off our very well choreographed performance to them, and then talk to them all individually so we can progress the story. After exploring our surroundings, we head back to the HQ where we meet Sonon. Yuffie complains to him about being distracted by adult pastimes, but after her scolding we leave the building and practice our teamwork on Ramuh. We don't gain anything of use from this fight, not even any experience if I remember properly. However, it was good to have a little bit of a refresher on the synergy technique in this DLC. After beating the summon pretty easily, we go and grab our new IDs alongside Nayo, but on our way we bump into Tifa and Barrett talking about their experience after the Airbuster fight. Once this is over, we go to the far back streets of this place where the girls get catcalled by Corneo's lackeys. Since they wanted to be so bold, Yuffie and Sonon showed them who really is the boss by kicking them all around the place. Since Jesse wasn't providing IDs anymore, a random dude came to deliver our order, and once he left it was time for us to head towards the train. This was until we got a message from a pigeon however, which let us know that we had to reroute so that we could go towards the pillar of Sector 7. While on our way, there's a new weapon for Sonon for us to pick up, and right after this we see this guy being cornered by the Shinra soldiers. With his very quick hands he doesn't let himself get captured and runs away from them. We then follow these guys down into the factory area and have to defeat a bunch of enemies that stand in our way until we come across our first mini-boss. I first use range attacks on it to make sure I don't take any damage from standing too close, and dodge out the way when it comes charging. When Sonon eventually gets an ATB, this is where I use his new weapon ability so I can deal even more damage towards the enemy. After not too long, some smaller enemies came crawling out of the ground, however with the 2 ATB I had charged up, I decided to use Windstorm to take them all out from its AoE. For the rest of the fight, I just kept spamming attacks and using my ATB when it was charged, and that got this fight over with. With no more enemies in our way, we decided to do some exploring and climb along a bunch of conveniently yellow painted grates to get us into previously inaccessible areas. This eventually led us into a very spooky part of the factory with the leprechaun sleeping in the middle of the area. The goal was for us to sneak past it without making a sound so that we didn't wake it up. However, unfortunately, a mouse comes squeaking past and startles Yuffie. Of course, she can't keep her mouth shut, so now we have to defeat this next mini-boss too. As you can see by our health, we took quite the beating while traversing the previous area. However, to start this fight I used basic attacks until I charged up some of my ATB. Once I had 2 of them, I activated Fire Ninjutsu since that's the leprechaun's weakness, however I then had to dodge its charge attack. I did dodge the first one with Broom of Form, however he did another one right after which I wasn't expecting. It dealt so much damage which killed Yuffie, but since Sonon is just too kind, he sacrificed his remaining HP just to bring us back to life. This did mean that activating the Fire Ninjutsu was a waste of ATB since it goes away on death, but I kept attacking as normal, using my ATB when I could and using Broom of Form to avoid all the damage coming at us. Right before another charge we were able to stagger it, and once charging yet another ATB, I managed to finish it off with an Out of War. After running away from this place, we got to throw our shuriken at a whole bunch of boxes for items that we're never going to use, but once running a little further down, I get to a bench to get Sonon back to his fully healed self. We do know what benches usually mean though, and that's to signify an upcoming boss. Before that happens though, Yuffie and Sonon cook up a plan to save our friend from the Shinra soldiers, and who better to be a distraction than the amazing Yuffie. After a little dance she's probably choreographed since she was a little Utayan, and then being laughed at for just being a kid, we see Sonon save Blondie from his handcuffs, but then the soldiers decide to call backup on us. What else would it be than a giant robot bug to try and squash us? I started off the fight by getting an ATB to activate lightning ninjutsu since that's its weakness, following that up by attacking its tail with magic while synergized, and that gets it pressured. We can now start attacking its head since it can't hurt us, but don't quite stagger it before it regains its movement. We do still get a decent amount of damage in however. With the robot running away for now, it thinks it can shoot some mini robots at us to take us out. However, after locking onto them and damaging them, they get destroyed, making the Gigantopede fall back onto the platform. While casting even more magic on it, it finally gets staggered. So with the ATB we have, we use a synergized Art of War dealing huge damage, and it gets us into the final phase. For some reason the boss wants to become a drill, but we don't ask any questions and just deal with it. Alongside this though, there's even more mini robots for us to destroy before they make us explode from all the missiles. After taking out a few of them to give us some extra breathing room, I focus my attacks back onto the big robot while also getting shot at from all sides until we eventually make this machine be engulfed by its own flames. After our little victory chat and getting some employee ID cards to get us into the Shinra headquarters, we head back to the slums and go back to our initial plan of getting onto the train, so we head down to the station and get aboard it. After dealing with a very cramped form of travel, we eventually get to Shinra HQ and make our way inside towards the elevator. Using our stolen IDs, it gives us access to it. However, once we were picking a floor to travel to, Scarlet and some guards end up coming inside too. Initially, it seems like we're in the clear, but quite obviously, once we leave, it seems Scarlet knew all along since she locks the door that would make our journey much shorter. Oh well, I suppose we're about to do some sightseeing. We make our way through some corridors and end up in a pretty big room with machines all around its perimeter. After a short conversation with Sonon, Scarlet then appears to give us some challenges. Our first fight is against some slug raids and a sweeper, so with our lightning ninjutsu active, we use plenty magic to take all these out. We get a short break here, probably to heal ourselves, but since we can't do that, we just have to wait until the next phase starts. When more enemies finally come out, it's nothing too difficult since it's only a bunch of slug rays. Following on with the strategy from last time by activating lightning ninjutsu, I also use synergize so that Sonon will work with Yuffie and spam magic attacks too. The battles in this area are done now though, so we cut down one of the giant boxes hanging off the ceiling to get some leverage to get to the higher platform. After a short cutscene showing what Scarlet's up to, we enter the research facility and get ambushed by some shock troopers. All these enemies we're starting to fight now are getting pretty tough, which is pretty scary for our future encounters. However, once this battle is over, we go and turn on the power for this section of the facility to help us climb to a higher floor. All we do now is run a little, fight some enemies, run a little further, and fight even more enemies until we come face to face with some armored shock troopers. There isn't even a bench before this fight, and with our character's HP as we are, there's no chance for us to beat this fight in our current state. Well, this means that we need to trek all the way back to use that bench that we get after defeating Scarlet's room of enemies. Just brilliant. We end up getting to the bench anyway, and I also sell a bunch of stuff so that we can afford better armor, which should help us a lot for the upcoming bosses. Once all this was done, I've run all the way back to the enemies we needed to fight to show them who's boss. They come charging through the doors, and as soon as I can, I just spam them with attacks. Every time I get an ATB, I use it right away to deal the most amount of damage, and when Sonon gets to charge, I synergize and use Art of War to do even stronger attacks. Unfortunately, Yuffie does die here, which causes Sonon to sacrifice himself for us, but we managed to finish off the rest of the battle with her alone. Now that all these are done, Scarlet shows up in another one of her holograms telling us where to go, and this is most definitely about to be another trap, but we'll go for it anyway. Thankfully there's a bench here so I don't have to hike all the way back to the start of this place. However, we now get to choose what enemies to fight for the next few battles. I first select the floating eye icon, and the enemy turns out to be some Mark II monodrives. The ones with the green aura around them need to be damaged with physical attacks to hurt them since everything else is immune. So eventually I finished that one off so we can swap to the other one with a blue protective shield. Unlike the green one, this can only take magic damage, so after doing enough attacks to get both me and Sonon to 180B, we exploit the enemy's weakness with a powerful synergized windstorm which finished it off. When picking the next encounter, the sword looks pretty scary, so I went for the other one which I didn't think would be too bad. We have to go up against two blast rays, and while they do spam us with rockets sometimes, exploiting its weakness seems to be the best way to deal with them. After enough attacks, it left him staggered. However, since we were mainly using ranged attacks anyway, the force field it creates during a stagger didn't affect our strategy too much. Just spam out lightning attacks until it explodes. Now on our next selection, I would much rather have the monodrives than that other machine, and I'm glad I selected this since they were all the basic form instead of Mark IIs. This made the battle so easy since as soon as it started, I just dealt damage to get an ATB, then exploited their weakness by using the AoE windstorm attack which took them all out. The next enemy we have to face is a moth unit, and we have to keep our distance so we don't get cut up by its blades. It's here that I figured out that if Yuffie is getting juggled, activating synergy will get Sonon to help her out and cause the following attacks to be immune. This would have been very helpful to know earlier on, but hey ho, after dealing just a bit more damage this fight seems to be over rather quickly. And finally, the last fight of this section is here, and it's nothing short of a nightmare. Since we can't restore our health at all after the previous fights, our characters are so vulnerable, and that leads to Sonon dying. I did try and avoid the death with attacks with Yuffie too, but because of its random charges, it's very hard to react and predict when to use Brumal Form, and she ends up dying too. We start our next attempt by spamming with attack and trying to dodge everything it was throwing our way. Brumal Form was doing so much work in this fight, however eventually Death Wheel did get a hit on Yuffie which killed her. After being revived however, I used my A to B and that actually got the enemy pressured. With only 200 HP left, I managed to take the thing down right after, which gives us access to the elevator to go to the next boss. Before this though, I get full use out of this bench because I'd rather not make my fights any tougher than they already are. After spending the time to prep our gear, we run through some more hallways until we get to yet another huge room with Scarlet inside. She jumps into her giant suit of armour and wants to squash us, however we have other plans. I start the fight by attacking her until getting 2 ATB and activating Fire Ninjutsu since that's what Scarlet is weak against. After dealing enough damage to her, she gets some sentry launchers to gather around the perimeter to bombard us with rockets, so I take these things out so we don't explode. After dodging even more of Scarlet's attacks and then depleting her health, it leaves her pressured so we can spam it with attacks until we enter the next phase. She starts off by shooting a giant laser beam at us, however I do avoid the second one so it's all good. I then activate Fire Ninjutsu again and repeat what we did last time. Honestly, I just spam with attacks until health is gone again. While pressured, I attack her arm since it increases the gauge, and after not too much longer she goes into a stagger. With my ATB I swap to Lightning Ninjutsu, followed by a maxed out banishment with that element since it exploits the armor's weakness. This brings on the next phase where Scarlet becomes a full-on knight. She kills Yuffie with all of her slices, so once being revived I can start my assault on her. I manage to break a shield to start with which stuns her, and then destroy a claymore while she can't act. Right after this, Scarlet then goes to change her loadout once again, back to the ones that can shoot giant laser beams, so that's just great. I focus my attacks on the macro cannon to prevent them abilities from happening, however, as luck would have it, the boss gets defeated when I break down the first cannon. Now the game really doesn't want this challenge to be complete at this next part as it doesn't even give us a bench before we have to fight some underground soldiers. I die so many times to them since my HP is just way too low to even make a dent in their health. I do come up with an idea though, and I'm so glad I bought some revival earrings at the last shop, otherwise this would have been impossible. I equip the accessory onto Sonon since he has the high HP amount, which means that the auto revive will restore more HP since it's percentage based, so inevitably when he dies since he's only got 1 HP, he gets quite a lot of health back. Right after this, Yuffie dies and Sonon does a self-sacrifice which transfers all this new HP Sonon just got from the revival earrings to Yuffie. So now we can start spamming these guys with attacks now we have plenty of HP to work with. We do get grappled quite a few times which do big damage to us, as well as them going invisible was definitely a scary thing. However, we managed to beat them all up. Right after this, we get surrounded by even more guards, and even though we were able to keep fighting, they decided to be cheap and just throw a grenade at us. This made us flee into the nearby combat simulator, however we get locked inside. As we were about to leave, we hear an alarm, and it turns out the combat sim has been started up with a few rounds of enemies for us to fight. The first round is pretty easy since it's only against some unknown entities. The main thing I had to watch out for were its Arga spells since they do huge damage. However, as long as I hold block before the magic hits, we should be fine. After this though, I beat them both up, letting us move on to the next battle. This one has some of these rabid wolf things that could inflict poison and also get you into a bind attack. Even though these abilities were brutal if they landed, their total HP was pretty low so the battle ends rather quickly. For our third battle, it's only against some Shinra soldiers, and these were the easiest fight here. I literally just spammed them with attacks and they eventually died. For our final battle, we had to go against a diabolic creation and a projector, which was the reason all these fights were happening. I started this fight by focusing on the monster's arm, and once getting an ATB with each character, I used a synergized art of war which dealt huge damage, as well as pressuring the enemy. I kept attacking as much as possible, and eventually the arm got destroyed which left it pressured again. I did only use basic attacks since I wanted to save my ATB. We eventually got a stagger on it, and once defeated, the shield was lifted from the projector. Since I did the smart thing of saving my ATB, I had now charged up 2 for both Yuffie and Sonon, so using this as my only opportunity, I used a synergized art of war between the two of them which destroyed the thing within only one phase. I'm glad I didn't have to fight the whole monster all over again just to do a tiny bit more damage to the projector like I did on my own playthrough last time. With the combat sim being conquered, we rested up, upgraded our weapons so that we were even stronger, then left this area to see all the underground soldiers laying lifelessly on the ground. We followed the black fog that flooded the floor and found ourselves in front of Nero inside a testing chamber. We see him using his magic powers which look terrifying, and our battle with him is about to start. I'm going to save everyone's time by just saying this was the hardest fight in the game so far. I would get to the very last phase, and if someone's health got into critical condition, Nero would just use an ability that was an automatic death and couldn't be avoided. I died so many times to him, but at long last I got the winning run. I started the battle by avoiding attacks and dealing damage where I could. After enough had been done, it left him pressured, and I found the best way to raise his gauge is by synergizing with Sonan, and then spamming square so that we would go into our tag team like attack. This shot up the gauge, and once half full we had to repeat what we did last time. Again, we got another pressure, staggered him once synergizing, and followed up with an art of war between our characters. This brought on the next phase of this fight, and he completely flung Yuffie across the room. Once we had back control of our party, I used another synergized art of war to deal heavy damage and get Nero into his pressure state. With this, I again spammed square while synergized and brought up the gauge. When Nero could fight again, he started shooting so many things at us, and I had to concentrate so much to make sure I avoided every single one of them. After landing a few more attacks, we get into the final phase, the roadblock I've been facing these past few times. Of course, I avoid attacks where I can and deal damage until pressuring him. I synergize and fill this gauge until he gets staggered, and then do an art of war which really drains down his health. Nero then does a super move that drenches the ground in a fog and starts to deplete our health little by little. Since I got attacked, it got Yuffie into a critical state, and since Nero has a very unhealthy amount of bloodlust, he kills her before we can do anything about it. Thankfully she had some revival earrings equipped to get her back into the fight, so I used my charge limit break on the boss's wings to try and destroy them. While I was doing this however, Sonan's health got into the red, so Nero killed him off. I'm pretty thankful I used the limit though, because at the end of it staggered the boss and now all I had to do was finish him off. Since I had no ATB, I used basic attacks until I charged one, then used an art of war to break down his health. Once attacking him even more and charged another ATB, I thought why not end this game in style and use a level 3 banishment. So this killed Nero and also completed this challenge run. So yes, you can beat Final Fantasy VII Remake integrated with no materia and items, and while it did prove to be a challenge, it was nothing compared to the main titles in the Remake trilogy. Like I said at the start of the video, if you want to check them out you can find a link in the description, but if not, why not think of any other challenges I could do and leave your thoughts down in the comments. I suppose now that I've done these 3 games, I'm forced to play part 3 with the same rule set, so when that game releases I'm going to be going through so much pain. But anyway, this has been Nephilim, and I'll see you in the next one.